Welcome to Iraqi Dinar Update, your go-to source for the latest news, expert insights, and real-time developments on Iraq's currency, economy, and financial reforms. Whether you're a long-time investor or just curious about the dinar, you're in the right place. It's not difficult to understand why this topic is shrouded in complexity, uncertainty, and layers of global economic interconnection. When we talk about monetary reform, revaluations, or adjustments to exchange rate regimes, especially on a multinational scale, we're dealing with a latticework of deeply interwoven systems. These aren't isolated decisions made in a vacuum. Rather, every step in such a transition requires a high degree of coordination across countries, institutions, and economic frameworks. A single misstep or lack of alignment could ripple across borders, causing unpredictable shocks and unintended consequences in both developed and emerging markets. At the core of such a transformation is the process of pairing currencies, or to put it more precisely, the realignment and recalibration of exchange rates among sovereign currencies in a way that reflects a new global consensus or a shift in the international financial architecture. Pairing currencies does not just mean setting conversion rates. It implies a shared understanding of the value of goods, services, and wealth in relation to each participating nation. It involves pegging, floating, or banding exchange rates in a way that can be sustained under real-world economic pressures. This is no trivial matter, because it requires that all participating players, from central banks to finance ministries, are on the same page. Without consensus and coordination, the framework collapses. In this regard, institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, the World Bank, and major central banks such as the US Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank function as the architects and enforcers of monetary order. These institutions do not merely observe, they design frameworks, set guidelines, establish safety nets, and often act as the final backstops for countries undergoing economic transition. Their role is especially important when countries attempt to harmonize their currencies with regional or global systems. These institutions possess deep institutional knowledge, historical data, and predictive modeling capacities that far exceed what the public or even most national governments have access to. Their decisions are informed by decades of studying currency shocks, debt cycles, capital flows, and balance of payments crises. Then there is the U.S. Treasury, which functions as the fiscal arm of the U.S. government but also plays a critical role in shaping international financial relations, particularly given the dollar's position as the world's primary reserve currency. The U.S. Federal Reserve, in turn, influences global liquidity conditions through interest rate policy, swap lines, and dollar funding windows. Together, these institutions do more than guide. They create the environment in which global monetary transitions either succeed or falter. What is often misunderstood is the interdependence between sovereign monetary sovereignty and global monetary order. On paper, countries have the freedom to set their own exchange rates and conduct their own monetary policy. But in practice, especially in a globalized economy with capital mobility and trade linkages, no country can act entirely independently. Currency adjustments in one major economy will inevitably affect exchange rates, competitiveness, and inflation targets in others. This is why monetary coordination is not only prudent, it is necessary. And it is why secrecy, patience, and gradualism often characterize the process. Large monetary changes can't be executed in the public eye without risking market overreaction. Even transparency has its limits when it comes to maintaining stability. Moreover, this process is not purely technical. It's also profoundly political. Countries may resist coordination if it threatens domestic political priorities. For example, raising interest rates to support a currency realignment might be economically sound, but politically damaging. Similarly, accepting an IMF-designed structural adjustment plan may help stabilize a currency, but could lead to social unrest or loss of sovereignty. These trade-offs mean that even with a shared technical understanding among central banks and global institutions, political will and public communication remain fragile variables. It is easy to see how even well-informed observers can miss the underlying coordination that must take place. People look for signs, policy papers, currency moves, political speeches, but miss the deeper mechanisms of alignment. Most of what matters happens behind closed doors, in high-level meetings, strategic bilateral agreements, confidential technical assistance sessions, and quiet legislative reforms. Central banks signal to each other in coded language, coordinate via global forums, and use soft power to shape the environment in which monetary reform unfolds. By the time the public sees a headline about a new exchange rate policy, the decisions leading up to it have often been years in the making. Understanding this helps explain why sudden, overnight changes in exchange rates, while possible, are usually the result of a long process of back-end alignment. And even then, such changes are accompanied by risk mitigation strategies like swap lines, reserve injections, or IMF standby arrangements. No major central bank or financial institution will gamble the global economy on a unilateral move, especially when dealing with fragile or transitional economies. They work in teams, in layers, in phased rollouts. To assume that everyone knows what's happening in advance would be a mistake. But to assume that the people who matter, the central bankers, technocrats, and institutional planners, don't have a coordinated playbook would also be naive. They may not know every detail of each other's actions, but they operate with shared models, risk assessments, and communication channels that allow them to act in tandem when it matters most. All of this points to one undeniable conclusion. The institutions you mentioned, IMF, BIS, World Bank, US Treasury, Federal Reserve, and central banks worldwide, indeed no more than the general public. They operate with greater visibility, deeper data access, and a more comprehensive understanding of systemic risk. That knowledge gap is not necessarily a conspiracy, it is a reflection of the structure and function of the modern financial system. So, when people talk about an impending currency reform or synchronized monetary policy adjustment, they are often glimpsing just the tip of an iceberg. The real work is being done far below the surface, where coordination, expertise, and institutional memory intersect to quietly shape the future of the global economy. And unless all parties are aligned, technically, politically, and operationally, any attempt to realign currencies or shift monetary regimes will remain stalled or incomplete. The stakes are too high, and the costs of failure too great, to act without absolute precision. Thanks for tuning into Iraqi Dinar Update. If you found this content helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat on Iraq's evolving financial landscape. Stay informed, and stay ready.